here in the lobby. We rely entirely on your support. None of our funding comes from the Chautauqua institution, so if you are able to contribute, we're deeply grateful. Now is the time to take those cell phones out, make sure they're on silent. I would like to introduce David Bernstein, who is a passionate advocate of the free expression of ideas in the state of Israel. He founded the North American Values Institute, which opposes radical ideologies and supports liberal values in and out of the Jewish community. He is the author of Woke Anti-Semitism, How a Progressive Ideology Harms Jews. David Bernstein is also co-founder of the Institute for Liberal Values, a consortium of like-minded organizations supporting liberal principles. He is past president and CEO of Jewish Council for Public Affairs and former executive director of the David Project. He spent 13 years at the American Jewish Committee in senior roles. He is a fellow at the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy and a strategic advisor for the Combat Anti-Semitism movement. Mr. Bernstein is a prolific speaker, podcaster, and writer, having written hundreds of opinion pieces for the Jewish and general press. Now, interviewing him today, David Bernstein will be interviewed by Joe Camphor. Mr. Camphor is the former chair of Gojo Industries, the family-owned company best known for inventing Purell. After passing the reins to his daughter Marcella, he now serves as a venture consultant and board member, continuing to mentor and guide innovation within the company. A graduate of the Wharton School and the University of Michigan Law School, he led Gojo for decades, transforming it into a global leader in hygiene and sustainability. Beyond Gojo, Mr. Camphor chairs several venture firms and invests in medical device and Israeli biotech startups. A passionate philanthropist, he co-leads the Lippman Camphor Family Philanthropies, supporting initiatives in education, health, and Jewish life. He was the past chair of Jewish Federations of North America. He served on the board of the Jewish Agency of Israel. And also
we want to get to this guy.
We will, one more line, all right? He is currently involved in the Honeymoon Israel project. And now I will get off the stage and let them do their thing.
Okay, can you hear? Is the mic working?
Yes.
Yes. Mic is working great. David, first of all, I've had so much fun just getting to talk with you the last couple of days, and I have to tell you that my family got a little chance to talk with David this morning, and we talked all last night and then this morning again. And I love it when my views start to shift. And I think the greatest tribute to someone who brings you something is that your views actually get refined and shift a little, and mine have. So thank you on a personal level for doing that. I've got to say one more thing about your resume that to me is so important, and it's a way I'd like us all to listen to David today, and that is these thoughts were percolated in David's writings and his work in the early teens. Okay, more than 10 years ago, he was out front with his ideas. And these are some I was trying to think when he was expressing them, when I was starting to catch up with him. And it was always several years afterwards. So what we're going to learn today is not only, I think, where we are today, but also where we're going to be tomorrow, because he's really not only a scholar and a supporter of the Jewish community, but a bit of a futurist. One of the things that I think we heard yesterday that you framed your issue was there's a conceptia out there. Use the word conceptia. I heard that before. It's a lovely word. But the oppressor-oppressed idea sort of has infused the system. 40 years ago, it was there, but people didn't recognize it, and it's grown. That's what you told us. You've chosen to work on anti-Semitism in K-12 education. Again, if you think about developing a future, he's thinking about what it's going to be like when our K-12ers are out there and what they're thinking. And we complain a lot about what some countries do to teach their children very young, to hate. We want to teach our children something else. So we know that there's been stuff on college campuses. We know that we talk about it all the time, but tell us a little more about K-12 and why you made that choice.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful to do part 2 today. Really loving it in this community. It's a real honor to spend time with you. The nicest thing that's been said to me since I've been here is that the conversation yesterday sparked other conversations at your dinner tables last night. So if that's the case, I feel like my work is done. So it's wonderful. So let me talk a little bit about this K-12 problem that we're facing. And I'm going to do it with 2 examples. I'll go with Exhibit A. How's that? Exhibit A. About 2 months ago, our director of research at the North American Values Institute, which is my organization that really involves itself in K-12 education, got a hold of the minutes and then later the video footage of a discussion that happened in Pareto Valley, California, which is in the Bay Area, not too far from Santa Cruz in that part of California. And she found that there was this horrible exchange that took place between 2 school board members in Pareto Valley and a group of Jewish parents and grandparents who came to the school board meeting. Now, what was this all about? As you may recall, if you were at my talk yesterday, California in 2021 passed something called ethnic studies, in which it mandated schools by this year to adopt curriculum around ethnic studies. Now, as I said yesterday, ethnic studies may sound like it's just about multiculturalism and about studying different cultures, but it is actually much more ideological than that. It's a theory of power. Who has power? Who doesn't? Who's oppressing whom? It's about settler colonialism. The United States, Canada, and Israel are all considered settler colonialist states. It's about imperialism, not just the kind of imperialism that we grew up understanding, which is countries going in and taking over other countries, but the idea that the West is imposing its values everywhere else in society. And it's teaching these ideas as gospel. Now, so this passes California. There's a lot of controversy. The governor signs it into law, and it is now spreading into various California school districts. Some are taking heed that it not become its most radical version of itself and engage in explicit anti-Semitism or explicit anti-Zionism. But other school districts have decided, well, if we're going to do this, we're going to bring in really radical actors, and they bring in these consultancy firms very often, and there's several of them, who come in and give them a curriculum that really has all the most extreme elements. And that was what was happening in Pareto Valley, California. They were signing a contract with a consultancy that wanted to teach that Israel was a settler colonialist state. And a group of the Jewish community came out to register their dissatisfaction at the school board meeting. I want to tell you what one of the school board members says. His name is Gabriel Medina. He says, I don't see you advocating to bring back Garcia or Mahmoud Khalil. You only show up to meetings when it's beneficial for you so that you can tell brown people who they are. Another school board member, Joy Flynn, accused the Jewish community members of leveraging their wealth. Quote, I've been a little bit taken aback, she said, by the lack of acknowledgement of the economic power historically held by the Jewish community. So they were both delegitimizing these parents who were coming there to expressing their concern about a specific curriculum. That's how they were met. Now, I think all of you, I'm guessing, will recognize that as a problem. I mean, that's ugly. That's brazen. But there are other forms of this same ideology that I think are less obvious to people that we're also seeing. We do a lot of work in Philadelphia and examining the school systems in the greater Philadelphia area. And a teacher in Philadelphia, a Jewish teacher, said you're not going to believe the new social studies curriculum that they just came out with. It is full of indoctrination. You can read about it, by the way, in the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's publication. They did a whole expose on Philadelphia schools and their curriculum, which came because we got this curriculum from that school teacher who was complaining about it. She was sort of a whistleblower. And I just want to give you a sense. The head of social studies is a guy named Ismael Jimenez. He's the district director of social studies curriculum. And he said in announcing the curriculum that we believe in, I know this is jargon, multi-prospectivity and dialectical thinking involving marginalized and historically excluded voices. In March of this last year, Jimenez put out in social media that he sees educators as quote-unquote agents of change. Every child should walk into a classroom and feel the revolution stirring in the air, because that's what the real educator is. Liberation with a syllabus. Now, I'm guessing that second example might strike some of you as being radical and extreme, but not anti-Semitic. And you're right, there's nothing explicitly anti-Semitic about that second example. He didn't say anything about Jews, he didn't say anything about Israel, he didn't say anything about Zionism, but he's built a curriculum on this oppressor-oppressed ideology. And that oppressor ideology, I would argue, is giving rise to the anti-Semitism that we're seeing in places like Corio Valley, California. And so if we're going to deal with this problem in K-12 education, and I'm going to argue that it's actually quite widespread now, it's coming into school systems all over the United States, not everywhere equally, not equally problematic, but everywhere, a lot of places, then we're going to have to actually deal with not just the most explicit examples like that in Corio Valley, but like those in the Philly school system as well, because if we don't deal with it at this ideological level, we're not really dealing with it.
It's interesting, this hostility, and the core of the idea. You talked a little bit yesterday about what has been happening on college campuses for decades. We didn't pay attention to. But are there other roots? It sounds like there's an industrial complex, people making money on this. I mean, what's the roots of this that are underneath this, that's driving it, fueling it?
Yeah, the roots are actually manifold. So if you go, several things were happening in the late 1960s that really planted the seeds of what we're seeing now. One of them, by the way, was Soviet anti-Zionism. I don't know that there's a wonderful scholar named Isabella Tabarowski. She's a Soviet Jew. She's written quite extensively about this. I recommend anything that she's written on this is worth reading. And she traces this back to after the 6-Day War in 1967. The Soviet Union began to panic and really wanted to discredit Israel and Zionism because it had taken on many Arab countries as client states. And so it developed an academic field called Zionology. And they wrote books and pamphlets, and they recruited scholars that were all designed to discredit Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. And that actually took its toll. Other people started mimicking the Soviet ideology. And a few years later, you had the Zionism is Racism resolution before the United Nations General Assembly, adopted by the UNGA. Take that and put it aside for a second. At that same time, in the late 1960s, and I might have talked about this yesterday, you had a group of very radical academics from the postmodernism school. Postmodernism is this field that was designed to sort of shape the roots of our modern intellectual sensibilities. What it said is, you think you have the truth. You think you have knowledge, but you don't have knowledge. Knowledge is really a function of the very powerful actors in society telling you what to think so that they can stay powerful. And we have to question all the foundations of knowledge. You might have heard of deconstructionism. So the deconstructionists went back into our literature and our economics and our philosophy and our psychology and tried to say all of that is, if you read into it, is really an effort to keep powerful people in power. And those academics spawn other theories, related theories, but over time that have morphed and evolved into some of what we're seeing today, to this current oppressor ideology. Now, that remained confined mostly to higher education for a long time. I mean, we saw traces of it, and we shouldn't pretend like we didn't see it. We saw traces of it in various ways, but it was mostly in higher education, in the various humanities and social science departments. But around 2013, 2014, it jumped the lab, without a doubt. We started to see it elsewhere. We started to see it in corporate boardrooms. We started to see it in nonprofit organizations. We started to see it in K-12 schools. And it's really taken off from there. There might be a backlash against it now. It might be receding in some spaces, but in other places like K-12, they're doubling down on it.
You know, I'm trying to connect why anti-Semitism has played such a big role in this philosophy. Is it the truth that we're just always underneath the surface waiting for anti-Semitism to rise? Are there players that are actually looking and separating us out from the crowd of the white privilege? Because I remember reading about, we've read about the Holocaust when in Poland they said there's Poles and Jews. Well, the Jews were actually Poles. But even though they were Poles, they were classified differently. Are we classifying Jews differently with all whites now? And is that coming out anywhere, or is it unspoken?
Yeah, so part of what this phenomenon did is it laid out a very stark racial classification system. It said basically you're either white or white adjacent, or white complicit, or you're brown, black people, or BIPOC person. And it created a very complex hierarchy of privilege to oppression. And so even if somebody doesn't say where Jews fit into this hierarchy of oppression and privilege, it's not hard, and if you believe in that worldview, to sort of map us onto that. And so where all this comes together is you have this anti-Zionism that started in the Soviet Union that worked its way through universities. And you have this postmodern ideology that I talked about that's worked its way through universities. And then you have radical Muslim groups, and you have first Saudi funding of radicals, and then you have Qatari funding of radicals. And you see the sort of perfect storm of these various streams coming together in the last decade or so, now affecting our discourse in a very real way. And so Jews become then easy to take off the shelf in a way, easy to say, well, we have this view of Jews as being powerful actors. It's in the body politic, it's in the collective imagination of the West, and we're going to now use that to claim something different about Jews, that Jews are really not just white, but we're, as my colleague Pamela Poresti, who spoke here, by the way, said, we're hyper-white in a way. We are the paradigmatic white people because we are high in economic achievement, or high in economic status, and high on average educational achievement. And so people who already wish us ill, who already have certain views about Israel and Jewish power, are now using this discourse about race and racial classification to put us squarely into the most privileged category. Now, not everybody does it consciously, not everybody does it explicitly, but you can feel it beneath the surface as you're seeing this anti-Semitism pop up in various ways, and you're seeing it on college campuses, and you're seeing it in K-12. That's the undercurrent. That's where it's coming from. And I think that's what we have to start to recognize.
Before we go on and talk a little bit about the K-12 and the direct work you're doing, which I think we're all interested in because we have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and we know that they're going to grow up learning things that we may or may not want them to learn. I just want to open it up a little bit and see if there are sort of questions or thoughts about where David's been so far that anybody wants to raise, so this can become a conversation.
Yeah, I'd like if you could please return to this, the notion of settler colonialism, and it's how it became the predominant social philosophy in higher education. I would just as an aside say a graduate of Columbia in the 1960s, when core curriculum covered from ancient times through the Renaissance into the Victorian era of imperialism and the present day. And even there, with a continuous commitment to the core, the Renaissance period, the Enlightenment period is now omitted, and the focus jumps from Roman times, medieval, to settler colonialism as the dominant political force to study. And that used to be contained within the Islamic studies programs, but as you said, it jumped ship. What's behind it? I mean, it's not an all-explaining philosophy. What's its appeal?
Yeah, it's a good question. What's its appeal? So let me just repeat it because there are a lot of people here who might not be able to hear the question outside. So the question was, where did this settler colonialism come from? What's its appeal? Why all of a sudden has so much of academia bought into this settler colonialism narrative? Well, first, there's a great book you should all read by Adam Kirsch called Settler Colonialism. It's actually a short book. It's brilliantly expressed, and he really goes into it. If you can bring him here, by the way, to speak, he'd be tremendous. I think he'd be perfect for this community. So you all remember Edward Said, who was the Palestinian-American professor at Columbia, who wrote a book called Orientalism in the mid-1970s. It was probably the most influential piece of nonfiction written in the last 70 years. It was that influential. And what he argued was that the West has created a fanciful version of the Orient in its own mind that bears no resemblance, and that really we are, it's a kind of imperialism that we're imposing our values and our understanding of the world onto a place that's very different, and as a result, we are using it as a justification for actual war and imperialism. And this book took off and became the dominant idea in many universities, to the point which it enjoyed so much success that a lot of the academics who really believed in it as gospel started to try to prevent other academics with different views from getting a post. It started, as you said, in Near East and Middle East studies departments, and it spread into literature, which, Said was a literary critic.
Said was not a professor of Islamic studies. He was an English professor.
He was an English professor, exactly.
I had the unfortunate experience of doing seminars with him. And he was an anti-Semite in the late 60s.
Yes.
Before he wrote that book.
Right. So these ideas have been percolating, and you only knew them if you took a seminar with him, or if you had a professor who assigned you the book, but then didn't treat it as one book out of many, but treated it as sort of a Bible in a way. And that's what happened to academia. It sort of calcified around this idea of settler colonialism, around the idea that there are these states, like the United States, like Canada, like Israel, that came in and dispossessed land that belonged to other people, and have used their power to impose themselves and their worldview on the third world. The global north is oppressing the global south. That's one of the orientations here. And in the United States, against indigenous people or other marginalized people. It's applying that lens to literally everything as an all-encompassing explanation.
I saw another question, I think, in the back, yeah.
That you?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Didn't know exactly what you were going to talk about, but I did a little call it climate change Jews. On the left side of this, is everything going to get better? And could you talk a little bit about some of the articles I read last night that the state, I'm talking about California now, the state passed a law, decided or said that individual school districts, which are close to 1,000 in California, had to implement this. There was no funding, there were no guidelines, and just about everything you said is being contested around the state, many other issues about the lack of oversight. So my sense is what you're saying is accurate, but it looks as though, after reading an article about what California did with housing, and they're going to withdraw that law. I'm sure you all read that this morning. This looks like it's going to die, or it's certainly going to be reviewed by the higher ed. So is it let's say, as dangerous as you're feeling, or is it really localized to individual school districts that have, which is what we're doing in all the states, the individual school districts are making decisions that the state used to make, and now it's down at the local level. Can you comment a little bit about your prognosis for the state of California?
Yeah, and California did advance this bill, pass this bill, signed it into law. It is an official mandate. So it is not just a localized problem as it is in many other places. So if you're going to, let's say, Pennsylvania, right, you're going to see a lot of this ideology in the Philadelphia school system, as I said. In Pittsburgh, maybe not so much in between the two cities, or less so. Allentown, places like that, obviously you'll see some of it as well. But it's not primarily traveling from state to local. Teachers are being trained in it, wherever they may be trained. They're getting it from the school union, they're getting it from their colleagues, they're getting it from the teachers' colleges, but they're not getting it through a state mandate primarily. Whereas in California, because they passed this legislation, this ethnic studies legislation, that is a mandate that every school system has to do. Now, California did in fact put into place guardrails. Now, those guardrails were designed to say, you shouldn't teach this in a way that's explicitly anti-Israel or anti-Semitic. And they gave, they cited some examples of it. But the problem is that the curriculum itself, even if it doesn't explicitly condemn Jews, still contains this oppressor-oppressed narrative throughout. It is built on what's called critical consciousness. Now, what's critical consciousness? Critical consciousness is that this belief that we should be able to see systems of oppression that exist everywhere throughout society. And we're going to teach children to see these same systems of oppression that are in every nook and cranny of our society and every nook and cranny of the West. That's what it's teaching, and as a result, it's spreading. Now, it was indeed an unfunded mandate. There was no funding attached to it, and some school districts are starting to object to that. But it's still, it hasn't been overturned by the California legislature, and every time groups like mine come and try to propose it to be overturned, they conveniently kill it in committee, and it never sees the light of day. So unfortunately, we're stuck with this for the time being. And all we can do is try to prevent its spread. Now, originally when this happened, we thought that's exactly what would happen in all the other states we were concerned about. And it did happen in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and it happened in Massachusetts, and it happened in the state of Washington. But a lot of other states did not go that route. And the way we're actually seeing this in most places is district by district. In other words, we didn't need to pass a state mandate in order to get into school systems around the country. So that's the primary mode is very, very local, with some places, with some exceptions, where states are doing the driving.
I think that was a pretty good lead-in to the question, and we'll go here for a minute, then we'll grab your question in a moment. That was a pretty good lead-in to the question of, what do we do about this when it's hyper-local, and it's happening all over the place? I know you have a whole institute that's looking at this, but that's quite a challenge, and you might tell us what a couple of the strategies are for dealing with that.
Yeah, thank you. What are the strategies for dealing with this? So, number one thing that we saw in the last year and a half is Jewish parents are talking to each other on WhatsApp groups. You can't find a community in which there isn't a group of Jewish parents that are saying, did you see what Jonah brought home from school today? And they start to share. And I mean, there are dozens of these, and some of them have several hundred Jewish parents on them. So groups like mine, we get on these WhatsApp groups as soon as we can, and we start to develop toolkits, and we start to do trainings, and we develop petitions that they can then send to the California Superintendent of Public Schools and sign them. We're empowering parents. Parents, I believe, are the powerhouse, they're our secret sauce here. There's nothing like a Jewish mom who's angry about what her kids are learning in schools. I mean, and by the way, here's another strategy. If you can get some of these Jewish moms to find some Asian moms and Hindu moms to go with them, then you're an unstoppable force in politics. We work very closely with some Asian American groups who feel very strongly as we do it. They may not come at it in the same way we do. It's not about anti-Semitism for them. If a Chinese American mom finds out that their kid's magnet school is about to close, as they did in San Francisco, you're going to create some very strong feelings. And so we've got to start doing a better job connecting within school systems with parents who might come at this. They may not agree with us on anti-Semitism, but they're aligned with us on the larger values. So that's number 2. Number 3, we've got to expose the bad actors. You know, I have to tell you, I told you about this guy, Gabriel Medina, in Correo Valley, California, right? To be honest with you, it's a gift. Why? Because somebody that explicitly anti-Semitic lets everybody else know how egregious this problem is. So within a week of him coming out with those comments and us publicizing what he had done, the California Board of Regents took up ethnic studies and decided, after it saw what happened in Correo Valley, to reject ethnic studies as a graduation requirement for entry into the California college system. So sometimes what happens in the most extreme places can serve as a reminder and a warning sign to what can happen in some of the places that are just in the flirtation stage with some of this. So when the extreme things happen in the Philadelphia school system, which is very hard not to crack, we can then tell the parents in Lower Merion School District right outside of Philadelphia, this can happen in your school district as well. We see some of the early signs of it. So we got to really expose the bad actors, and that's something that my organization does a lot of. We're using artificial intelligence tools now, by the way, to screen school board minutes and to screen school board agendas so we know what's happening. We're getting really good at this so that we're able to let people know we know what they're going to do sometimes before they actually do it, because we're finding signs and warning signs that they're on their way. One of the most powerful talking points. Look, if I'm going to talk to a group like you all, let's say a group of concerned parents about what's happening in their schools, I'm going to tell you the radical forms that this takes. And I'm not going to spare you any of the details because I want you to be able to recognize it. But that doesn't mean that that's the right tactic when you go to the school board meeting or you go to meet with the school superintendent. What's the right tactic? It's probably to tell them that, have you seen the decline in reading scores in our school district? Have you seen the decline in math scores? We're going to be doing this new curriculum on social studies that's telling people that they're oppressed, the suppression studies, curriculum when our kids are not reading at grade level. That's probably the most potent thing that a parent can bring to a meeting. And it really is stunning. 3 months ago, they came out with the nation's report card. It's a report that comes out every 2 years. And we saw the lowest scores in the country come out of any of the school districts our kids attend school in. And you could argue, and I'm sure that there's more factors than one, that the distraction that's sent into schools over these ideological issues has taken them off the game. And it even affects the way that they teach reading. We've known, for example, that teaching phonics is the best way to teach reading. And yet the schools continue to teach something called whole language theory. And it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. They've been studying it for decades. And yet for some reason this has gotten linked to this larger ideology. It doesn't work. We've got to be able to talk about these, and these are the kind of things that I think are the most potent messages. We need to find parents who are willing to run for school board. In some places, the only way we're going to change the climate in schools is to get a few good parents to say, I'm gonna run. You know, some of them, I remember talking to them in this one school district, Lower Merion School District. Look, guys, we're going to keep on having this problem unless some of you ante up here. And you can tell that's just not what they want to do. You know, they're busy people, they're hockey moms and hockey dads, they got a lot of things on their plate, and yet 5 of them joined the race to run because they knew they had to. And so those elections are coming up this fall. So those are some of the things. And the other thing I think we can do is we can engage friendly legislators, members of Congress, state delegates, and state senators and the like. A lot of them don't really know how bad things have gotten in your schools. And if they don't hear from you about it, and they don't hear from the parents about it, they're not going to bring their letter. Now, a member of Congress probably doesn't have that much say officially in what's happening in the schools, but superintendents don't exactly want to be dragged before a congressional hearing like those presidents of universities were. We were involved in getting members of Congress to hold hearings with 3 superintendents of different school systems. It was fascinating. We're trying to do it again because it didn't go nearly as viral as those hearings that the university presidents were brought to that everybody in the country saw. But it was a first step, and we have to do more of that. So when you meet with your member of Congress, and you should, add that to the list. So those are some of the things that we do as an organization, and that you can do as parents.
There was a question there.
Mine's more of a comment. My name's Andrea Rosenblum. I heard you yesterday and today. I'm 51 years old, so I'm probably the age of many people's children in this room, and I have 3 sons who are 23, 21, and 18. My father fought in the 6-Day War. My son just completed his IDF service on February 5th. Thank God he's left.
Thank you.
And my 3 boys went to the best public school in the state of Missouri in St. Louis. And my middle son in high school, he's 21 now, kept coming home and saying, Mom, they're making us fill out these circles on where we're privileged and where we're not privileged. So to me, that's the same as oppressor and oppressee.
Sure.
And so if you're white, you're privileged. If you are educated, you're privileged. If you're male, you're privileged. If you're a Jew, you're privileged. And Spencer, my son, was very upset. And of course, I was like ignoring him. I called him last night after hearing your speech. This is, 6 years ago. And I apologized to him for not taking him seriously on this privileged, non-privileged, and they're making the kids separate. I think that when people are hearing you speak, and mine is more of a comment than a question, people are not understanding that this is really happening. My husband works at a university in St. Louis. He had the same conversation, privileged and non-privileged, and he raised his hand in some sort of HR meeting and said, I feel uncomfortable filling this out, and they just brushed over it. So this really is happening in our schools, and yeah.
Right. So let me just say a word about privilege, right, for 1 second. It is true that not everybody starts at the same place in life. We know that. Some people have advantages that other people don't. That is true. We should be able to talk about that. But is it permanently affixed to being a specific ethnic group? Is it permanently affixed to being a certain religious community? Is it permanently affixed to being a certain gender or sexuality? Or is it a lot more complicated than that?
Oh yeah, if you were straight, you're privileged.
Right.
If you're not straight, they have the kids all do
Right.
this.
And I was talking to my stepson about it, and he said, I think it's contextual. Okay, and I said, yes, what half the professors in the country didn't understand. Yes, in certain instances, being black is a distinct advantage. Certainly being black in the South and Jim Crow America is a distinct advantage. It may be the case, I'm sure it's the case today in certain contexts, but it's not always the case under every circumstance. We have to have nuanced conversations about this. And all nuance is lost in this. And it really is an affront when schools organize kids into affinity groups based on their race or their sexuality or whatever other gender or identity category they signed up. I grew up, my mom's from Baghdad, Iraq. She's an Iraqi Jew. According to 23andMe, I'm 50.4% Western Asian. I didn't grow up necessarily thinking I'm white. I didn't think I wasn't white. It was complicated. And here I'm being told I have to choose that category or else I'm engaging in some kind of white supremacy. And I think we have to push back against that. And when it happens to our kids, and your son was right, and I'm glad you came full circle to recognize it, we dropped the ball. We weren't paying attention to what was happening. Or we thought something that was actually quite dangerous was benign. Or they won't remember it once they get to college, or once they're out of college and they enter the workforce, it won't matter anymore. Well, it did matter. And a lot of young people who had been indoctrinated in this ideology came into the workforce and demanded of their employers to behave in a certain way, and they changed the culture of their institutions in a very extreme way. The ACLU today does not resemble the ACLU that I grew up supporting and loving. It's just a different organization. When the ACLU adopted this idea that we'll only support free speech cases when it involves, a marginalized person. They adopted that policy that they undercut the entire idea of civil liberties. And that's what happened in a lot of nonprofit organizations. And now we see this in K through 12, and it's even more extreme in K through 12 education than it is in these other institutions. Because you have so much of the system that's been built around this. Look, there's a lot of amazing teachers still. And there's a lot of teachers who look at this and say, this is bogus, I'm going to just de-emphasize it as much as can. And there's a lot of young people who make fun of it, particularly boys, by the way. A lot of boys just giggle at it and say, this is ridiculous. And they don't pay much attention. But there's enough of them that are paying attention, and I'll bring it into other aspects of their lives that we've got to be really worried about.
There's a question in the back, and then.
Can you take this here so everybody outside can hear you?
Is there a web page that we can go to that lists examples of these things that are happening in K through 12 around the country?
Yes. As luck would have it, and you didn't tell me this, we just came out with a parent toolkit, okay? And it has an extensive list of all the ways this can show up. You can go on our website, navivalues.org, that's Navi Values, N-A-V-I values.org, and go to the resources section, emotional learning, SEL. Now, SEL used to be a perfectly fine pursuit. It taught kids to have grit and to really work through their issues. It taught them, tools of being able to deal with some of the challenges they were facing in their personal lives. It was turned on its head in the last decade. Now SEL tends to be, but not always, tends to be another tool of ideological indoctrination about who's oppressed and who's the oppressor and how the oppressor feels and the like. There are a slew of these various frameworks that you may not recognize readily that you have to dig. So go find that, and we'll continue to update that as we go along. We have a whole glossary of terms that people need to look out for. So that's an excellent question. Thank you for asking.
Does the toolkit also include in it some of the examples of specific situations that are happening around the country? And like case studies and like for any of the ones that are kind of the more visible ones, is there any sort of tracker where we can see like what's going down with those situations?
So yeah, it has an extensive list of examples of this, and it even has a whole list of letters and other emails that you can send to your school and talking points. It's a whole comprehensive toolkit for a parent. And it's interesting you use the word tracker. We have something called the K through 12 extremism tracker. We publish it 3 times a week. You can just look up K through 12 extremism tracker. And 3 times a week, we are highlighting cases of where things have gone awry in various school districts. The last one that came out yesterday was on the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the Teachers Union in Massachusetts. It is a doozy. And if you want to know, just read what has gone on in Massachusetts. There's probably 15 posts about the MTA in Massachusetts in the past few years. It is really extreme, really eye-opening. But we look at other school districts in Massachusetts, in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a hotbed of this. Philadelphia is a hotbed. There are parts of New York and New Jersey that are hotbeds of this. So tune into that. You'll see a lot of what's happening around schools. In the front row.
David, I'm Peter. My question relates to the conceptia, oppressor-oppressed, ramifications for democracy in view of your theme that the conceptia undermines critical thinking, scientific inquiry, evidence-based decision-making, and can you comment on how the conceptia is undermining our ability to function as a democracy and making us more susceptible to demagoguery, to ideologues?
That's a great question. That's a very powerful question. So I think it works in a number of ways to undermine democracy. As you're suggesting, when you undercut critical thinking, when you turn students into sort of snowflakes because you're indoctrinating them in a specific ideology. You're undercutting their future ability to think and to reason through problems and to argue and to disagree with each other and to function in a system where not everybody agrees with each other. You're making them poor citizens in both ways. You're making them poor thinkers and they're poor citizens, and you're making them less able to actually build bridges across polarization. So that's one critical way you're dealing with it. You're also undercutting the sort of key value system that our society is based on. Call it Western values, call them enlightened values, call them American values. I have an essay that's coming online in the next week. It's a cover essay in the Jewish Journal. It's called Reclaiming American Values on July 4th. And it's the idea like there are these values that have animated the American dream, that have made it so generations of immigrants could experience success. Imperfectly, by the way, sometimes with hiccups, sometimes with even real oppression and discrimination, but still success. Freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry, e pluribus unum, out of many one, equality of opportunity rather than equality of outcome. Those are core tenets of our liberal democracy, and when you undercut them, you undercut our liberal democracy. Lastly, I think this is really important. This radical identity politics on the left also plays into what's happening on the right. And it creates an identity politics on the right that could even be more dangerous. So when you have people who are saying all day long that by virtue of their ethnicity that they're oppressed, what do you think a poor white person in Steubenville, Ohio, or anywhere in rural New York or rural PA is going to think when they look at the opioid-infested communities, they look at the manufacturing sectors that have been abandoned, how do you think they're going to receive being told that they're privileged by virtue of their skin color? I can tell you not well. Okay, I can tell you not well. And what that does is it feeds polarization. They come, even if I'm going to speak in partisan terms for a second, even if the Democratic Party comes to them with an economic agenda that would seemingly favor their interests, it will be, those cultural issues will override those economic interests because they're being told that they're the oppressors and they don't take kindly to it. And they're turned off by it, and it causes a lot of negativity and resentment. It's bad for democracy when you do that. It's not a common framework for how we can raise society together. It's not a common framework for solving problems. It's just a source of grievance that creates grievances everywhere, and I don't think it's the right way to run a democracy.
Let's go here.
In the name of heaven and in good trouble, there is so much that you're saying that needs to be unpacked, and that I need 2 hours at least to unpack your 1 hour, and I obviously don't have that time. Number one is there's not even a recognition of how Netanyahu's government has been dividing the Jewish people, which has in and of itself been a cause of the anti-Semitism that you're talking about. Now, I am a Jew. I'm former executive director of the Philadelphia Zionist Federation, and I am a retired staff member of the National Education Association, the union which you talked badly about yesterday. And I just can't let what I feel are false claims about our alleged role and the alleged role of unions in fostering anti-Semitism in schools without a response. First off, in Illinois, which is where I worked, there is a law requiring in every age, in every grade, that anti-Semitism be covered as a section of training. That was done with the support of the Illinois Education Association. I was around when that happened. First, we have to define racism. Racism is bias against any group for apparently irrational reasons. In practice, it is oppression of a group for the purpose of economic gain.
So,
Can I please finish?
actually, no.
Excuse me. Excuse me.
That's not right.
I'm happy to take your position, but I think you shouldn't monopolize and go on and on and on, because there are other people who want to ask questions. But I would like to actually address some of it. Look, I'm not here to talk about Israeli policy. I don't agree with some of it. I agree with some of it. I don't agree with all of it. We can have a very in-depth conversation about it, but it's not. To me, Israeli policy does not cause anti-Semitism. We Americans, we're Jews living in America. If the idea is that certain people are hostile towards us because of what happens in the Middle East 6,000 miles away, that in and of itself is a form of anti-Semitism. Look, I used to have an office in Washington, D.C., right across the street from the National Education Association. And they had the best cafeteria around, and it was very cheap, and I would go there for lunch, and it was the most mild-mannered place you could ever imagine. And I'm sorry, but it has changed a lot. And if you want to just look at the NEA's agenda on for the next conference. You don't have to believe me. Things change. The teachers union in Chicago City Schools is very radical. It was taken over by a group of called the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA. They were able to get elected a mayor who's very radical. And they are not, they have very hostile positions, and we need to understand that. And when they came in power, we were very much people with mainstream sensibilities, and a lot of mainstream Jews were disempowered in that process. In other words, we were marginalized by that really radical takeover in a place like Chicago. So I think we've got to be open-eyed. If we want to look at the NEA, and if you want to look at American Federation of Teachers, which is not quite like the NEA, fine, let's have a conversation. But I invite you to go and look at their own materials.
Oh, I just one quick comment. I went to the NEA website last night after the conversation just to learn, and there's a section right on the front page, white supremacy culture is one of their programs. So I would invite, and I don't know anymore, and I'm not taking sides because I don't have enough knowledge, but we need to all we need to all dig deeper into this to really understand. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, David. I have a question. You've given us a number of examples where school districts have curriculum that support anti-Semitism. Can you give us examples of school districts where there is curriculum that teaches what anti-hate is and that have been anti-Semitism? Thank you.
Yeah, there is anti-Semitism curriculum in different schools around the country. There's a lot of Holocaust studies, for example, which don't necessarily, by the way, mean that it doesn't necessarily mitigate, unfortunately, against anti-Semitism. I mean, I want to teach the next generation about the Holocaust, but I think we should understand that it's not necessarily a shield against anti-Semitism. I don't believe that teaching about anti-Semitism, although I'm totally glad that it's happening in certain places, is going to necessarily fend it off. I think the most important thing that we can do is teach civics in schools. Civics used to be widely taught in our public school system. It's the building blocks of our democracy. How does our system work? How do we relate to each other? What does it mean to be a good citizen? There are great civics programs out there. There's the Jack Miller Center for Civics Education based in Philadelphia. It's a wonderful place that does a lot of best practices around civics education. I know it's counterintuitive because we like to think, well, we see this anti-Semitism, so let's teach anti-Semitism. When what we really need probably is for people to get resituated within sort of our founding principles as a country. Around these founding principles, around civics, around what it means to be a good citizen, and how to talk to each other, I think that's more likely to actually ameliorate anti-Semitism than actually fighting directly against anti-Semitism.
One last question.
If you could speak.
How's our timing? Go ahead.
Just quickly, when we're talking about courses that are given in anti-Semitism, etc. Those are the obvious. But what we really have to worry about are the things that you were speaking about. That which is not obvious. That is the nuance beneath what the headline is. And I think that's what I really appreciated your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I want to give one example that we had at breakfast today. Somewhere in the audience, I think my brother-in-law's here. He's sort of a world expert in testing, school testing. And he would tell you the story, and he told David this morning, that 10 or 15 years ago, you had to make your testing completely bland so that there was no culture, so there'd be no cultural bias. And now the states are asking him to put cultural bias into and answers like white supremacy into the test answers. So it can be subtle, like you said, it can be underneath, doesn't have to be on the surface. I want to end sort of with where David started with us yesterday. You know, he started his speech yesterday, if you recall, talking about Machloket L'Shem Shemayim, arguing for the sake of heaven. And I think most of you are familiar with the Jewish text of Hillel and Shammai both make rigorous arguments, and God comes down and says, you're both right. And one thing about Jews is that we like to argue. It's part of our culture. The fact that we can both be right and hold multiple opinions is very unique to our Jewish culture. For lots of cultures, it's either one way or the other. It's funny, I chaired Honeymoon Israel, national organization that brings interfaith couples to Israel. I was sitting with some of the kids, and one of the kids said, when I was at my father's home, and she was a non-Jewish woman, said, if he said something, it went. And then for the first time, I went to my husband's house, and everybody was arguing all the time. And it was culture shock. So the thing that I think we all have to think about, I'm just giving you a little bit of my own take on this, is that we are taught to take multiple sides. But even in the Hillel and Shammai argument, at the end, God says, we're going to follow Hillel. He didn't say we're going to leave it up in the air. Because basically, he said we're going to follow Hillel because he listened to the other side. He was kind. He even repeated the other side's arguments. But then at the end of the day, we're going to make a decision. And the way David has changed my thinking a lot is that we bend over backwards sometimes. And we all have opinions, and I think we could all stay here for hours talking about this, but we try to bend over backwards because we're people of the book, we're people of speech, we're people of argument, and we try to give other people the credit. And I think we should hopefully hang on to our cultural heritage that way. But when it comes to something like this, the stakes are awfully high for children in K-12 that David is working so hard on. And we have very high stakes. And I know I want to just express my appreciation that you're taking on this challenge and sort of waking us up to this. And that doesn't mean that we have to shift completely to the other side, because that's untenable for most of us probably in this room as well. We have to just figure out how to deal with the problems in this place.
Yes, thank you for that. One of the things that I think we can do is model this ourselves. So for many years, I've been doing, until my kids got too old and stopped coming to Shabbat dinner conversations and debates. And I would raise an issue. And it could be anything from, what we all debate about, the Israel-Palestinian conflict or whatever, to something about, do video games cause violence? Now, my role is to take the opposite position as their perspective. So, of course, that means that video games are causing violence left and right. And, you see, and all of a sudden it looks like a bunch of 14-year-olds want to kill me all of a sudden, right? Proving my point. But it's the argument itself, the debate itself that teaches people how to think. And really, when I'm talking about my concerns about anti-Semitism, I'm really talking about my concerns about a society capable of having discussions and debates around critical issues that allow us to solve problems, allow us to talk to each other even when we disagree, allow kids to develop critical thinking skills that they can take to the workplace. I mean, we're entering this age of AI. No one knows exactly how that's going to affect us. all of a sudden my 20-year-old sounds like he's, Hemingway, and couldn't write a complete sentence before. So, what's this going to do to our mind? So I think the most important thing we can do is model this and try to bring that to the schools. Trust me on this. When I make an issue of what's happening in schools, I'm not telling them to just teach what I want them to believe. If you're going to teach about Ibram X. Kendi and how to be an anti-racist, then teach about John McWhorter's critique of Ibram X. Kendi. Let kids decide themselves what they think about these big social issues. Let them debate it. Set up the debate. That's what real education is about. And we can do that in our own homes, and we can urge our schools to do more of that as well. Really, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Let Bernstein go to the front. He's going to do a book signing.
I'm a really number 4.
You could let it go. That would be
Thank you.